Alright ladies and gents, I'm Rich Lewis and welcome to episode 8 of Off Your Soccer. Today we will be looking over some of the talking points from the first weekend of the season, including Raheem Sterling has been making a statement but not in the way he'd have preferred this weekend. We're asking when is a red not our red at St James's Park. 2 points dropped for Spurs, but was there an exciting reason to be cheerful? Has Forest's attacking promise gone under the radar? And will there be a last season of pain at Goodison Park for Everton fans? So first up, we have Chelsea versus Manchester City. It finished a comfortable victory 2-0 victory for Manchester City. They weren't at their best, but they got the job done as we've seen them do many times over the previous many seasons now. That wasn't really the talking point from that game. It was more what happened going into that game. And it was Raheem Sterling's response to being left out of the squad. Not just the starting 11, but he was left out of the squad. He then, via his team, put out a statement saying they were seeking clarity on his role at Chelsea. There's a lot of responses gone out from various pundits and journalists regarding what Raheem Sterling has said. Understandably critical. It's a strange world that we live in, footballing world, where a player is left out of the side and therefore feels the need to put a statement out. It's just something you would not have dreamt of going back, maybe even 10 years ago. It seems absolutely bizarre. I think, though, within the context of Chelsea and the many signings that they've made and are still making, I did wonder if maybe it was purely a case of Raheem just wanting to make sure people didn't forget about him. I think he was always going to be commented on that once he'd been left out of the squad that he wasn't playing. But this made it front page news. It was almost an advert, a massive come and get me plea. I'm a massively experienced player, title winner with Manchester City, and my team aren't going to play me, so come on, try your hand, I might be available. My first response to this was, what is he doing? It's ridiculous. You can't put a statement out that you're not in the team. But Raheem Sterling, he's not a stupid guy. He will, his team aren't stupid either. This will have been about far more than obviously them being unhappy about the situation. I think under different circumstances, they're not going to bother with this. I think this is very much putting the message out to everybody. It's basically taking out a front page advertisement on a newspaper to say, I'm here. Try Chelsea's hand. You might think I'm too expensive, but just give it a go. But that being said, where would he go next? There aren't too many options out there. In fact, I can't think of any options out there who would look at somebody, his sort of profile. I think he's 29 now. He's on big wages as far as we're aware. And then you then narrowing yourself down to the likes of your very big clubs. So in terms of, from a financial perspective anyway, so your Paris Saint-Germain's, Real Madrid's, Barcelona's, there's no point mentioning Manchester United when we're talking about a former Manchester City and Liverpool player, let alone a number of other reasons. I think you're more realistically than looking at a loan. I think there's been talk that there's been some interest from Juventus potentially, which does tally with their supposed interest in Jadon Sancho, which was rumoured a little while back too. But then are Chelsea going to look at that and be happy to sanction a straight loan? I imagine they'd want a good chunk of those wages paid, which other clubs, I think they'd be lucky to get half his wages paid. If they're looking to then put an obligation sort of clause in that contract, I don't imagine too many clubs going for that either. So it's going to be very interesting what happens this year, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if this one goes right down to the transfer window, and then something will happen on the last day. But let's wait and see. We've got about 10 days left of the window now, so there is still time for something to happen for Raheem. He's still a top quality player. I think he's taken some criticism at Chelsea. He's had a few high profile moments where things haven't gone too well for him, but he has been a very consistent player over his career, and it's very hard to judge. Not that he's actually played poorly at Chelsea, but even if he had, with the comings and goings there and the dysfunction at that club, I think it's a very hard situation to judge any player. Anywho, moving on to Newcastle versus Southampton. A very quiet, low-profile game without incidents. I think not. Headbutt gate. What was Ben Brereton Diaz playing at? So, just for context, Brereton Diaz went head to head with Fabian Schar, or flipped that round. Fabian Schar went head to head with Brereton Diaz. You see it all the time in games. Doesn't happen as often these days, but two players square up, and as Fabian Schar leans towards Brereton Diaz, and also just to add at this point too, if you watch the replay back, it does look like Brereton Diaz leans in himself as well. But as Schar leans in, Brereton Diaz falls to the floor. It was full on WWE style falling to the floor. It was a fantastic performance from Brereton Diaz, playing the heel perfectly. But with the beauty of, let's say the beauty, with VAR these days, there should be an ability there to look at that and go, what actually happened? And for me, that is what happened. Two players went head to head, one drops to the floor. I struggle to call that a headbutt. Now, I've seen a lot of people, again, pundits, journalists, and some fans too online, saying, well, once you put your head in, you do run the risk. And I can't disagree with that. But in very much how, as a United fan, I felt about it when Casemiro got sent off, when he was accused of putting his hands, I think it was to Will Hughes' throat, and you watch the replay and he's actually got his shirt round by his neck. And then I've seen plenty of games since where people have had, their hands around someone's neck in a lot more blatant way and nothing's happened. Well, here you'll see other games this season where people go head to head and nothing happens. And the deciding factor here was Brereton Diaz hitting the floor. And he has got Schar sent off. You can argue that Schar shouldn't do what he did, but Brereton Diaz does exactly, for me, he does basically the same. If Schar goes to the floor, well, he timed it in that way. If they could have both ended up on the floor, I don't know what the referee would have done then. Did he send them both off if they both collapse on the floor? I think if you watching that replay, the referee goes to the monitor, you look at that and you go, well, that contact doesn't justify what happened. I was listening to the Football Ramble podcast earlier, and they were talking about, it's very careful where you draw a line here, because you might have to start weighing up the severity of a headbutt if you do take this to VAR and you try and assess the impact caused. But for me, you're not, because it wasn't a headbutt. It wasn't a headbutt to begin with. I don't think you can. It's quite easy to see from looking at the footage that there's just not the force isn't there. So I think it was a poor decision. But I think you'd see that every time once one guy falls to the floor. I'm not going to go into it fully now. I'll definitely save this for another pod. But I think it does tie into players going down in general to get decisions from referees. And it's been talked about for years, but the more players stay on their feet when something happens, the referee will rarely give a decision. I think one of the exceptions is probably like a pullback of someone's shirt. But even then, sometimes players need to go over. There was the Harry Maguire incident in the Manchester United game on Friday where he gets booked for diving. And yeah, it was a booking because it's simulation. But what Harry Maguire is doing is he's anticipating the contact and he's going, when I get hit, you can't assume he's going, when I get hit, I'm going over. So he's expecting the contact to come. And the funny thing is, I think it was Smith Rowe at the time, if Smith Rowe does put a leg out and he catches Maguire and then Maguire stays on his feet, then you're not getting a penalty for that. And the contact in a lot of situations in the penalty area, I think more often than not, doesn't justify players going over, but it probably impedes their ability to get a shot away or to create a chance. But they're not going to get anything for it unless they go to the floor. And it's just plain wrong, but I don't see that changing anytime soon. We're going to move on now to Leicester 1, Tottenham 1. This was a strange game. Tottenham, as you probably would have expected, in complete control for a large chunk of that match. They didn't look like there was any threat from Leicester at all. The counter-attacks that Leicester were trying to put together were pretty straightforward. There wasn't a lot of variation there. Once or twice you thought maybe it could work, but generally no pressure. And then they did look a better team in the second half, even before the equaliser, but you still weren't too worried. But then once Vardy gets that equaliser, Leicester completely flip it on its head, and you start to think, hang on, Tottenham are in some trouble here. And then I think weirdly Really unfortunate injury to Bentancur, and thankfully he's okay. Gave Tottenham some control back when the restart happened and the game sort of balanced itself out again. But how it ended if you'd watched the first half, you never would have seen a draw coming at all. And Leicester had their chances to have won the game too. But there was still, aside from the result, there were some bright spots for Tottenham. One, Dominic Solanke looked okay. He was getting in some threatening positions. He probably would have liked to have scored with some of the half chances that he had, created for himself at times in that game too. But I think the bigger plus point was Lucas Bergvall. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. 18 years of age, coming on the second half. So did Archie Gray as well, I should add. But it was Bergvall for me who looked fantastic. If he looked like I mean, it's a weird thing to say about a Tottenham player, but he looked like an Arsenal player, and how you see their players sort of move and interchange, and he looked so composed on the ball. He stood out massively, maybe partially helped by his sort of shocking blonde hair, but he definitely looks like a Premier League player. And to look that composed, making his Premier League debut at 18 years old, you kind of wonder what sort of player Tottenham will have on their hands come the end of the season once he's managed to get quite a lot of experience under his belt. Fingers crossed he can avoid any serious injuries. He did get absolutely berated by his goalkeeper at one point for making a mistake. And yeah, he obviously didn't look too happy about that, but he took that on the chin quite well as well. He looked a very composed character, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of him this season. But great result for Leicester as well. We know more than I think most people expect they are going to get a points deduction at some point this season. So that's at least 1 point they may not have expected to have got. They can sort of put against that and tick off. Moving on to Leicester's neighbours, Nottingham Forest drew 1-1 as well with Bournemouth. Now, this isn't really one of the big talking points from the weekend, but as I was looking through the games, it just sort of struck me that I don't think Forest are getting enough respect for their attacking talent at the moment. First of all, it was a decent result against Bournemouth. Having just watched the highlights of that game, and I think Forest would have liked to have got more out of it with the chances that they had. But looking at their attacking setup, you've got Anthony Elanga at 22 years old, Morgan Gibbs-White 24, Callum Hudson-Odoi 23. Elanga's starting games for Manchester United. Morgan Gibbs-White has been one of the standout players for England under 21s for a long time. And he looked like very early on he was going to make the breakthrough at Wolves. And he almost had to take a step backwards to go forwards again. But since he's gone to Forest, he's been absolutely sensational. Callum Hudson-Odoi, obviously most people know that he was almost a Bayern Munich player on a couple of occasions, who they really pursued him heavily from Chelsea, and he's had his injury problems over the years, but he's still a quality player, and it's easy to forget he's 23. He seems to have been about so long you'd expect him to be 26 or 27 by now, but he's only 23, so he's younger than Gibbs-White. And then you add into that Chris Wood's scoring goals at the moment. Awoniyi was brilliant last season too, and he's going to play a big part this year as well. Elliot Anderson came in from Newcastle too to add to the mix, and they're currently pursuing both Eddie Nketiah and Santiago Jimenez from Feyenoord. Santiago Jimenez, by the way, scored 26 in 41 for Feyenoord last season, and he has 4 in 3 games so far already this year. Obviously, they're not going to sign both of those players, but overall adds to an array of attacking talent. And if those guys hit their potential, you're looking at players who are going to be worth, especially in the case of Elanga and Hudson-Odoi, exceedingly more than what Nottingham Forest played for them. And if they can keep this group together and add to them and avoid getting into any PSR-related trouble, then they could surprise a lot of teams this season. I think you'd fancy Forest on their day to cause a good 2/3 of the league big problems. So their season could be anything they want it to be, although you would say that a home game against Bournemouth, if they are going to have aspirations beyond staying up this season, it's a game you've got to look to win. Now, that logic also applies to Everton. A home game against Brighton, start of the season. Now, we know Brighton are a very good team, What you don't want to do is lose 3-0 at home on the first game of the season, which is going to be your last game at your home at Goodison Park. But that is what happens to Everton, and you've got to ask, is there going to be a survival battle ahead again? And it's hard to see how not. Now, I say it's similar to Forest. If you've got aspirations above, your supposed station, you've got to win these home games against teams who, maybe you may be finishing around at the end of the season. And if it wasn't for Everton's points deduction last year, that would have been the case with Brighton. Everton did quite well in the end. In fact, very well considering. Although Everton had the chances in this game, by the way, but it was still a good win for Brighton. And now they've lost this home game here. Within their next 3 games, they go away to Spurs and Villa. The other game is a home game against Bournemouth, which there's obviously no guarantees there. But it's very realistic. They can lose to Spurs, they could lose to Villa, and then if you've lost 3 out of the first 4, there's not a lot of good feeling around the club. The takeover is a bit up in the air. I think there's an exclusivity period now for the new prospective owner, but he's got to look to try and sell his stake in Crystal Palace, so it's not a foregone conclusion by any stretch of the imagination. A bad start to the season, mixed with the uncertainty, just sets the scene for another relegation battle for Everton. Obviously, even if they do lose those games, there's plenty of time to try and get get out of trouble. But you don't want to be getting out of trouble. You want to be sort of aspiring for a little bit more this year. The fans have been through the mill now for a few years in a row for various reasons. So I do hope for Everton fans that things do start to pick up. But there's other things going on there too. You look at the team they put out, and it was decent. And there were a few injuries there which didn't help. But Ashley Young got sent off in the game. But why is Ashley Young starting at 39 years old? It doesn't make any sense to me. Even with the limited resources and funds that they have, that shouldn't be happening. Maybe that's an exception because they have signed some, good young players there too. But yeah, Everton need to find a way to start being more progressive and moving forward. Maybe if they can see this season out and they stay in the league, then next season in the new stadium, maybe they can kick on. But hopefully they're going to be playing in that stadium in the Premier League still and not in the Championship. So they're the games this week we were looking at in a little bit more detail, but let's have a really quick glance through the remaining games. West Ham 1, Aston Villa 2. It's a really good 3 points for Aston Villa in their first Champions League campaign 2 this year, so there's going to be more eyes on them, seeing if they can handle both competitions. And away to West Ham, West Ham have made some great signings in the summer too. That was a massive result for Villa. A lot of West Ham's players started on the bench, so it's kind of hard to gauge where they're going to be at once their new signings settle in. But once you've lost your first game, the fans are going to be hoping those players settle in quickly. Arsenal 2, Wolves 0. A routine win for Arsenal. I think it was difficult to learn too much for either team here. Wolves have just lost one of their best players in Pedro Neto as well, which wasn't going to help going into this game. They're hopefully going to add a little bit more power to the team. But when you do look at the side they were able to put out and their bench, it still wasn't a bad side for Wolves, to be fair. But 2-0 Arsenal, it's kind of business as usual, first game of the season. Ipswich 0, Liverpool 2. Ipswich did fantastically well to go a large part of this game, to stay level for a large part of this game, but that result felt inevitable. And Mo Salah, first game of the season, that is inevitable. So great win for Liverpool, and I believe Ipswich go to they've got a game against Manchester City next. Get those games out of the way. I mean, no one's expecting to get anything there, so it is a bit of a baptism of fire. But at least if they can start generating some points after that, they know they've got 2 of their most difficult fixtures of the season already out the way. Brentford 2, Palace 1. I really expected Palace to win this game. I thought they'd carry on with some of that great football that they showed last season. And they did, to be fair, for towards the start of the game. We're very unfortunate to have an Eze free kick ruled out, which the whistle had gone before the ball hit the net. So, there was a mistake there from the official. But once that's happened, you can't go back from there really. If that whistle's gone before the thing happens, there's no going back. So hopefully the referee learns from that and we don't see that again this season. Famous last words. Brentford grew into the game though, and they showed me they had more in the tank than I expected. That was without Ivan Toney as well. So and also their new striker as well. But yeah, fantastic result for Brentford. And maybe there's a little bit more life in than at least myself for one expected this year. And then finally, Manchester United won, Fulham 0. This I've already discussed in my You Only Come to Hear United pod, so you can check that out. Obviously on my channel on the playlist. So go and have a look at that, Manchester United fans. But yeah, but that was it for today. We've had a little look at all the games. We've got another big weekend of action coming up shortly. Only a few days away now. Just let it keep coming thick and fast. That's what we want to see now. We've been starved of football too long. Bring it on. Not counting the Euros. This is the proper football now. This is the proper stuff. So, yeah, good luck to all your teams this weekend, unless you play Manchester United, of course. And I will catch you all soon. Goodbye.